The wagon sat tilted in the frozen ravine like a broken toy abandoned by God himself, and Vincent Xavier would have ridden right past it if his horse hadn't caught the scent of something dying on the bitter January wind. He pulled his coat tighter against the brutal cold that swept across the Nevada territory, the kind of cold that turned a man's breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground. It was 1876, and Vincent had seen harsh winters before, but this one was particularly unforgiving. The wind howled through the mountain pass like a living thing, and the snow had been falling steadily for 3 days now, blanketing everything in white silence. His gelding, a sturdy bay named Ranger, nickered and tossed his head, refusing to move forward along the main trail. Vincent had learned long ago to trust his horse's instincts. He guided Ranger toward the embankment, squinting through the swirling snow until he spotted it. A covered wagon, listing heavily to one side, its canvas torn and flapping in the wind. No smoke, no movement. No sound except the relentless howl of the storm. Vincent dismounted carefully, his boots crunching through the knee-deep snow. His hands were already numb despite his gloves, and he knew that whoever was in that wagon, if anyone still lived, they wouldn't last much longer. He'd been heading back to Humboldt after delivering a string of horses to a ranch up north, and he was already 2 days behind schedule because of the weather. But he couldn't leave without checking. The back of the wagon was partially open, the canvas ties broken or cut. Vincent climbed up, his heart sinking at what he might find. He'd seen what exposure could do to a person, how the cold could steal life so quietly that death seemed almost peaceful. "Hello." His voice was rough from days of silence and cold air. "Anyone in here?" At first he heard nothing. Then, so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind, came a sound that might have been a breath or a whimper. Vincent pulled himself fully into the wagon, and his eyes adjusted to the dim interior. Supplies were scattered everywhere, as if someone had been searching desperately for something. Blankets lay in a heap, and then he saw her. A woman, curled into herself like a child, her lips blue, her face so pale it was almost translucent. She wore only a thin dress, completely inadequate for the weather, and her hands were tucked under her arms in a futile attempt at warmth. "Madam." Vincent moved quickly, his training from years of frontier living kicking in. He pulled off his heavy sheepskin coat without thinking, wrapping it around her slight frame. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering but not quite opening. Her skin was like ice under his fingers as he checked for a pulse at her throat. It was there, but faint and irregular. She needed heat, and she needed it now. The wagon offered no shelter, not with the canvas torn and the wind whipping through. Vincent made a quick decision. He gathered her into his arms, surprised at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. He could feel her shivering, violent tremors that racked her entire body, and he took that as a good sign. When the shivering stopped, that's when death was close. Getting down from the wagon with her in his arms was treacherous, but he managed it. Ranger stood steady as Vincent approached, the horse's warm breath creating clouds in the frozen air. There was no way to ride with her unconscious like this, not safely. But about a quarter-mile back, he'd passed a dense grove of pine trees that would offer some protection from the wind. Vincent carried her through the snow, following his own tracks back along the trail. His arms burned with the effort, and his chest ached from breathing the frigid air, but he didn't stop. When he reached the grove, he found a spot where several trees grew close together, their branches creating a natural canopy that had kept some of the snow from accumulating. He laid her down gently on his coat, which he'd spread over the driest patch of ground he could find. Then he worked with the speed born of necessity, gathering fallen branches and dead wood that had stayed somewhat dry beneath the tree cover. His fingers fumbled with the matches in his saddlebag, and he said a silent prayer of thanks when the first one caught, the tiny flame growing into a small fire that seemed like a miracle in the frozen wilderness. Once the fire was established, Vincent turned his attention back to the woman. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He pulled out his bedroll and spread it near the fire, then carefully moved her onto it. His coat was still wrapped around her, but it wasn't enough. He needed to get her warm from the inside out. Vincent had a small pot in his pack, and he filled it with snow, setting it near the fire to melt. While he waited, he rubbed the woman's hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. Her fingers were like icicles, and he could see the telltale white patches that warned of frostbite. "Come on," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered again, and this time they opened just a crack. He caught a glimpse of gray eyes, confused and unfocused, before they closed again. "That's it," Vincent encouraged, continuing to work on her hands. "You're going to be all right. I've got you." When the snow had melted and begun to warm, Vincent tested it with his finger, then carefully lifted her head, supporting it with one hand while he brought the pot to her lips with the other. "Just a sip," he said softly. "Nice and slow." She swallowed reflexively, coughed, then swallowed again. It was another good sign. Vincent gave her a few more small sips before setting the pot aside and lowering her head back down. He added more wood to the fire, building it up until the heat was strong enough to push back the cold in their small shelter. Night was falling fast, the already dim light fading to darkness. Vincent knew they wouldn't be going anywhere until morning at the earliest, not in this storm and not with her in this condition. He settled in beside her, close enough to share body heat, but careful to be respectful. He'd seen hypothermia before, knew that sometimes the best treatment was direct warmth, but he also knew she was a stranger, and he wouldn't take advantage, no matter the circumstances. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside their grove, Vincent found himself studying her face. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and spread across the bedroll like spilled ink. Even pale and half-frozen, she was beautiful in a delicate way that made him wonder what she was doing out here alone. Where had she come from? Where was she going? And why in God's name had she been in that wagon with no proper supplies and no warm clothes? The questions would have to wait. For now, all that mattered was keeping her alive through the night. Vincent dozed fitfully, waking every hour or so to add wood to the fire and check on his unexpected companion. Each time, he was relieved to find her breathing steady, her color marginally improved. The violent shivering had subsided into occasional tremors, and once, near dawn, she made a small sound that might have been words. When the gray light of morning finally filtered through the trees, Vincent assessed their situation. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into a crystal palace of white. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, and the wind had died down to occasional gusts. The woman stirred, and Vincent was instantly alert. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light, and this time they stayed open. She stared up at the pine branches overhead, confusion clear on her face. Then her gaze found Vincent and widened with alarm. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe. My name is Vincent Xavier. I found you yesterday in a wagon, nearly frozen to death. We're in a grove about 3 miles outside of Humboldt." She tried to sit up, but her body wasn't ready for it. She gasped and fell back, her face contorting with pain. "Don't try to move too fast," Vincent advised. "Your body's been through an ordeal. Here, drink this." He'd already warmed more water, and he helped her sit up just enough to take it without choking. She drank gratefully, and when she'd had enough, she found her voice. It was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but he heard every word clearly in the morning quiet. "Thank you." She paused, swallowed hard. "You saved my life." "What's your name?" Vincent asked. Clara Jameson." She looked down at herself, at his coat still wrapped around her, at the bedroll and the dying fire. "How long have we been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon." "Do you remember what happened? How you ended up in that wagon?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, her jaw working as if she was fighting to keep control. "My husband," she finally said. "We were traveling to California trying to start over, but Samuel, he got sick. Real sick. The fever took him 3 days ago." Vincent felt a weight settle in his chest. "I'm sorry." "I didn't know what to do," Clara continued, the words spilling out now as if a dam had broken. "We were already into the mountains when he died, and I couldn't bury him proper. The ground was too frozen. I wrapped him in our good blanket and left him by the side of the trail with a marker. I thought I could keep going, thought I could make it through to the next town. But then the storm came, and the horses broke loose, and I was alone in that wagon with nothing but fear." "You've been alone for 3 days." Vincent was incredulous. "In this cold?" "I had blankets at first and some food, but I used the blankets to wrap Samuel, and I think I got turned around looking for the horses. When I finally got back to the wagon, I couldn't find half our supplies. It was like they'd just disappeared." She closed her eyes. "I remember being cold, so cold I couldn't feel my hands anymore. I remember thinking that maybe it would be better to just sleep, to let the cold take me to wherever Samuel had gone. But you didn't." "No." Clara opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "I'm not sure why. Maybe I was too stubborn. Maybe some part of me wasn't ready to give up." She paused. "And then you came." Vincent added more wood to the fire, giving himself a moment to think. Clara Jameson was a widow, alone in the wilderness, with no supplies and no way to travel. He couldn't just leave her here, but taking her back to Humboldt with him meant getting involved in her story, her life. It meant complications. But what choice did he have? "Can you ride?" he asked. Clara looked uncertain. "I don't know. I can try." "We need to get you to Humboldt. There's a doctor there, and you need to be looked at properly. Your hands and feet, I'm worried about frostbite." "I don't have any money," Clara said quietly. "Samuel and we spent everything we had on the wagon and supplies for the journey. I can't pay you for your help or for a doctor." Vincent waved off her concern. "We'll figure that out later. Right now, let's focus on getting you warm and fed and into town." He had some jerky and hardtack in his pack. Not much of a breakfast, but better than nothing. Clara ate slowly, as if her body had forgotten how to process food. Vincent gave her his canteen and watched as she drank, noting that her color was definitely better than it had been last night. She was going to be all right, he thought. She was stronger than she looked. When they were both ready, Vincent helped Clara to her feet. She swayed, and he caught her, his hands on her arms to steady her. She looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," Clara said again. "For your coat, for the fire, for everything. I know I already said it, but I mean it. You didn't have to stop. You could have ridden right past." "I couldn't do that," Vincent replied. "No decent man could." Getting Clara onto Ranger was a challenge. She was weak and unsteady, and mounting a horse from the ground was difficult even under the best circumstances. Vincent finally had to lift her up bodily, settling her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. It was intimate, having her pressed against his chest, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, but it was also the only practical way to transport her. Ranger, good horse that he was, accepted the double burden without complaint and began the careful journey back to the main trail. Vincent kept the pace slow, partly because of the deep snow and partly because he could feel Clara trembling with exhaustion. She leaned back against him, and he could feel each breath she took, feel the residual shivers that still ran through her body. "Tell me about Humboldt," Clara said after a while, her voice stronger than it had been. "Is it a big town?" "Not particularly," Vincent replied. "Maybe 300 people, give or take, but it's growing. The railroad's coming through in the next year or two, and that'll change things. Right now, it's mostly a supply stop for the mining camps and ranches in the area. You live there, on the outskirts. I have a small ranch, raise horses mostly. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Clara was quiet for a moment, then she asked, "Are you married, Mr. Xavier?" "Just Vincent, please, and no, I'm not married." He wasn't sure why he felt the need to add, "Never found the right woman, I suppose." "That's a shame. You seem like a good man. Any woman would be lucky to have you." Vincent didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under rangers' hooves and the occasional call of a bird brave enough to venture out after the storm. It took nearly 2 hours to reach Humboldt, and by the time they arrived, Clara was barely conscious again, her body having reached the end of its reserves. Vincent rode straight to Doc Miller's house, a modest structure on the north end of town, and called out as he dismounted. Doc Miller appeared at the door, a grizzled man in his 60s with sharp eyes and capable hands. He took one look at Clara and said, "Bring her inside. Quickly now." Vincent carried her into the doctor's examination room, a clean space that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. He laid her on the examination table as the doctor lit more lamps and began gathering supplies. "What happened?" Doc Miller asked, already examining Clara's hands and feet. Vincent explained quickly, leaving out no details. The doctor listened while he worked, his expression growing more grave. "She's lucky you found her when you did," Doc Miller said. "Another few hours and we'd be planning a funeral instead of treatment. As it is, she's going to need careful watching for the next few days. Exposure like this, it can have effects that don't show up right away." "I'll pay for whatever she needs," Vincent heard himself say. Doc Miller glanced at him with raised eyebrows but didn't comment. "She'll need a place to stay. Can't send her to the boarding house in this condition. Mrs. Harrison would have a fit." "She can stay at my place," Vincent said, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, I have room, a spare bedroom, and my ranch is close enough that you can check on her easily." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But she needs to rest here for at least a few hours while I make sure there are no complications. You can come back for her this evening." Vincent agreed and left the doctor to his work. He led Ranger to the livery, arranged for the horse to be fed and rubbed down, then made his way to the general store. Clara needed clothes, real winter clothes and supplies. He found himself selecting items with care. A heavy wool dress in a deep blue that he thought would match her eyes, a warm cloak, sturdy boots, undergarments that made him blush as he requested them from Mrs. Chen behind the counter. Mrs. Chen was a shrewd Chinese woman who'd come to Humboldt with her husband during the mining boom and stayed after he'd died, taking over the store and running it better than he ever had. She raised an eyebrow at Vincent's purchases, but wrapped them without comment, though he could see the curiosity in her eyes. "New lady friend, Mr. Xavier?" she finally asked as she tallied up his bill. "A woman in need," Vincent replied. "I found her half frozen in the mountains. She lost her husband to fever." Mrs. Chen's expression softened immediately. "Ah, the poor dear. You're doing a good thing helping her. Your mother would be proud." Vincent felt a pang at the mention of his mother, who'd passed 5 years ago from consumption. She'd been a kind woman, always the first to help someone in need, and he liked to think he'd inherited at least some of her generous spirit. He spent the rest of the afternoon taking care of necessary business in town, checking in with the bank, ordering supplies for the ranch, and enduring the curious looks and questions from people who'd heard about the woman he'd brought to the doctor. Small-town gossip moved faster than lightning, and by the time he returned to Doc Miller's house, he had no doubt that everyone in Humboldt knew about Clara Jameson. The doctor met him at the door with a satisfied expression. "She's doing well. Better than I expected, honestly. No signs of frostbite that won't heal on their own, and her core temperature is back to normal. She's weak, and she'll need rest and good food, but she'll recover. Can I see her? She's awake. Been asking for you, actually." Vincent found Clara sitting up in the examination room, wrapped in blankets, her color much improved from this morning. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile that transformed her face. "Vincent, Doc Miller says I'm going to live after all. That's the best news I've heard all day." He held up the package from the general store. "I brought you some things, clothes and such, figured you'd need them." Clara's smile faded and her eyes filled with tears again. "I can't accept that. I already owe you so much." "You don't owe me anything," Vincent said firmly. "And you need clothes, unless you plan to walk around in that dress forever, which I don't recommend given the weather." She laughed, a watery sound, and wiped at her eyes. "You're too kind. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't worry about that now. Doc says you can leave, but you need rest and someone to watch over you for a few days. I've offered my home if you're comfortable with that. I have a spare bedroom, and I'll be a perfect gentleman, I swear it." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and Vincent felt as if she was seeing right through to his soul, weighing and measuring him. Finally, she nodded. "I believe you, and I don't have anywhere else to go, so I gratefully accept your hospitality." Doc Miller helped Clara change into the new dress while Vincent waited outside, and when they emerged, Vincent was struck anew by how lovely she was. The blue wool brought out the color of her eyes, which he saw now were more gray than blue, like storm clouds. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, and despite her obvious exhaustion, she held herself with a dignity that spoke of good breeding and strength of character. The ride to Vincent's ranch was easier than the morning journey had been. Clara was stronger now, though she still needed to ride with Vincent, and she seemed to take in everything around them with interest. The ranch came into view as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It wasn't much, Vincent knew. A small house, a barn, a couple of corrals, and a few outbuildings. But it was well maintained and comfortable, a place he'd built with his own hands over the past 6 years. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly. "Peaceful." Vincent helped her down from the horse and guided her to the house while he called out to his ranch hand, Tommy, to take care of Ranger. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off a small hallway. Vincent showed Clara to the spare room, which held a bed, a dresser, and a small table with a lamp. "It's not fancy," he apologized. "It's perfect," Clara said. She sat on the bed and Vincent could see how exhausted she was. "Thank you, Vincent, for everything. Get some rest. I'll make us some supper." Vincent wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage the basics. He put together a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, and when he knocked on Clara's door to tell her it was ready, he found her fast asleep, still fully dressed, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, then quietly closed the door and let her sleep. He ate alone, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. Yesterday morning he'd been a solitary man heading home from a business trip. Now he had a beautiful widow sleeping in his spare room, a woman he'd saved from certain death, a woman who stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. It was too soon, he told himself. She just lost her husband. She was vulnerable, grieving, and dependent on him. Any feelings he might be developing were inappropriate at best and predatory at worst. He needed to be her protector, her friend, nothing more. But as he banked the fire for the night and headed to his own bed, Vincent couldn't help wondering what Clara Jameson's story really was, and what role he was meant to play in it. Clara woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through a window she didn't recognize, and panic gripping her chest. Then memory returned in a rush. The wagon, the cold, Vincent's strong arms carrying her, the doctor's gentle hands. She was safe. She was alive. She sat up slowly, her body aching but functional, and looked around the simple room. Someone, Vincent she assumed, had left a basin of water and a towel on the dresser, along with the packages of clothes he'd bought yesterday. Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. She didn't deserve this kindness, not from a stranger. But then, Vincent Xavier wasn't really a stranger anymore, was he? He'd seen her at her most vulnerable, had held her through a frozen night, had quite literally saved her life. That created a bond, whether either of them wanted it or not. Clara washed and changed into a fresh dress, this one a serviceable brown wool, and braided her hair simply. She could hear sounds from the other room, the clatter of dishes and the smell of coffee, and her stomach growled. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real meal. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Vincent at the stove, cooking breakfast. He looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, though she guessed he was probably close to 30. He had dark hair that wanted to curl if he let it grow too long, and eyes that were an unusual shade of green. He was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard physical work, and when he smiled at her, Clara felt her heart do a strange little flutter. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better, actually. I think I might live after all. I'm counting on it. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." They ate together, and Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. Vincent was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a genuine interest in what she had to say. He asked about her life before, and Clara found herself telling him things she hadn't planned to share. She'd grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a successful merchant. She'd married Samuel Jameson when she was 19, a rushed courtship that her father had approved of because Samuel had good prospects as a lawyer. But Samuel had made some bad investments, lost money that wasn't his to lose, and they'd had to flee St. Louis to avoid the consequences. The trip to California was supposed to be a new start, a chance to rebuild their lives. But Samuel was never strong, Clara said quietly. He wasn't built for frontier life. When he got sick, he just gave up. I don't think he wanted to fight anymore. "I'm sorry," Vincent said. That must have been hard, watching him slip away. It was. But if I'm being honest, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but our marriage wasn't a happy one. Samuel was a good man in many ways, but we didn't love each other. Not really. It was more of an arrangement that suited both our families. She looked down at her hands. "I know I should feel more grief than I do, and maybe I'm a terrible person for saying this, but mostly I just feel relieved, and guilty for feeling relieved." Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You're not a terrible person. You're an honest one. That takes courage." The touch of his hand on hers sent a jolt through Clara's system, something electric and warm that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. She looked up and met his eyes, and for a moment the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Then Vincent pulled his hand back, clearing his throat. "I should get to work. Tommy and I have horses to tend to. You should rest. Take it easy today. There are books on the shelf if you want something to read and help yourself to anything in the kitchen. Can I help with something? Clara asked. I'm not used to sitting idle. Not today. Doc's orders were rest, and I'm going to make sure you follow them. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, we can talk about what you might want to do. Vincent left, and Clara found herself alone in the house. She washed the dishes, unable to help herself, then explored the small space. It was a bachelor's dwelling, functional and clean but lacking any real personal touches. No photographs, no decorations, just the bare necessities. She found the bookshelf Vincent had mentioned and was pleasantly surprised by the selection. Shakespeare, Dickens, Mark Twain, and a well-worn copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Whoever Vincent Xavier was, he was educated and well-read. Clara pulled down the Whitman and settled into the chair by the fire, letting the poetry wash over her. The day passed quietly. Vincent came in at noon for a quick lunch, then disappeared again until evening. When he returned, covered in dust and smelling of horses, Clara had dinner waiting. A stew made from supplies she'd found in the pantry and fresh biscuits that had turned out better than she'd hoped. Vincent's face lit up when he saw the spread. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. It's the least I can do. They fell into a pattern over the next few days. Vincent would work during the day and Clara would rest, read, and gradually take over the domestic tasks in the house. She was a good cook, better than Vincent, and she took pleasure in preparing meals that actually had flavor and variety. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Clara learned that Vincent had come west with his family when he was just a boy, that his father had died in a mining accident when Vincent was 15, that he'd worked every job imaginable to help his mother and younger sister until they'd saved enough to buy this land. His sister had married a rancher in Wyoming and moved away, and his mother's death had left Vincent alone. Don't you get lonely? Clara asked one evening. Vincent considered the question. Sometimes, but I have my work and the horses, and I've always been comfortable with my own company. He paused. It's been different, though, having you here. Nice different. The house feels more like a home. Clara felt her cheeks warm. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do. I can't stay here forever imposing on your hospitality. You're not imposing, Vincent said quickly. And there's no rush. Take the time you need to figure things out. But I need to support myself. I was thinking maybe I could find work in town. Mrs. Chen at the general store might need help, or maybe the hotel needs a cook or a maid. Vincent frowned. You're overqualified for that kind of work. You're educated, well-spoken. There must be something better. Like what? I'm a widow with no money and no references. I'll take whatever I can get. What about teaching? The town's been talking about starting a proper school and they'll need a teacher. You'd be perfect for it. Clara's eyes widened. Do you really think so? I know so. I'll talk to the mayor tomorrow, put in a good word for you. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she thought about Vincent's kindness, his generosity, the way he made her feel seen and valued. She'd been in his home for nearly a week now, and she was starting to realize that what she felt for him went far beyond gratitude. When he smiled at her, her heart raced. When he was near, she found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every word. When he was gone during the day, she missed him. She was falling in love with Vincent Xavier, and she had no idea what to do about it. Vincent was facing his own internal struggle. He'd been attracted to Clara from the first moment. He'd seen her properly, not half frozen and dying but alive and vibrant. But attraction was one thing. What he was feeling now, after a week of living with her, talking with her, sharing space and meals and quiet evenings, was something much deeper and more dangerous. He was falling in love with her, and he had no right to it. She was a widow, still grieving her husband even if that grief was complicated. She was vulnerable, dependent on him for shelter and support. Any advance he made would be inappropriate, potentially predatory. He couldn't take advantage of her situation. But God, it was hard to remember that when she smiled at him over dinner, or when he heard her humming in the kitchen, or when he came home to find the house warm and welcoming instead of cold and empty. Tommy, his ranch hand, had noticed the change in him. The young man, only 22 years old, grinned at Vincent one afternoon and said, "You're going to marry that woman, aren't you?" "Don't be ridiculous," Vincent snapped. "I'm not being ridiculous. I've seen the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you. You're both dancing around each other like scared rabbits. Her husband just died. She's mourning. Is she, though? From what I've heard, it wasn't exactly a love match, and death is death, but life goes on. You'd be good together, boss. Anyone can see that." Vincent wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Tommy was right. They would be good together. But that didn't mean it could happen. The opportunity to resolve the situation came 2 weeks after Vincent had found Clara in the wagon. Doc Miller stopped by to check on his patient and declared her fully recovered. The mayor, true to Vincent's recommendation, offered Clara the position of schoolteacher, with a small salary and room and board provided in a cottage near the church. It was perfect. It was exactly what Clara needed to start building a new life for herself. It was also the end of their time living under the same roof, and both Vincent and Clara seemed to realize it at the same time. "That's wonderful news," Vincent said, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. "You'll be a great teacher." "Yes," Clara agreed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's very generous of them. When do they want you to start?" "Next week. School starts the Monday after next, so I'll have time to prepare lessons and get the cottage settled." "That's good." "That's really good." They stood in awkward silence, the unspoken words hanging between them like a physical presence. Finally, Clara broke. "Vincent, I need to say something, and I'm just going to say it because if I don't, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Vincent's heart started pounding. "All right. These past 2 weeks, living here with you, they've been the happiest of my life. You've been so kind, so generous, so respectful. You've treated me like an equal, like someone whose thoughts and opinions matter. You've made me laugh, and you've made me feel safe, and you've made me feel like maybe I'm not a terrible person after all." "Clara, please let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I know it's too soon. I know I should still be mourning Samuel, and part of me is. But mostly I'm just grateful to be alive, and grateful that you were the one who found me. Because these 2 weeks have shown me what I was missing in my marriage, what I thought I'd never have. And I hope, that maybe you feel the same way." Vincent closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened your eyes and said thank you," he said roughly. "Every day has been torture, wanting to tell you but knowing I couldn't, knowing it was too soon and you needed time. But if you're telling me that you feel the same way, that I have a chance with you, then I'm going to take it." "You have more than a chance," Clara whispered. "You have my heart." Vincent kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Clara's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with an intensity that matched his own. It was a kiss that held all the longing and hope and fear of the past 2 weeks, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Vincent said. "I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but I don't care. I love you, Clara Jameson, and I want you in my life." "I love you too," Clara replied, "and I don't care what people say either. Life is too short and too uncertain, we both know that." "Marry me," Vincent said. "Not right away if you need time, but someday. Soon. Marry me and stay here and let's build a life together." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They told no one at first, wanting to keep their happiness private for a little while longer. Clara moved into the cottage and started preparing for her new role as teacher, and Vincent continued his work at the ranch. But every evening, after the sun had set and the town was quiet, Vincent would visit Clara at her cottage, and they would sit together, talking and planning their future. 3 months passed. Clara proved to be an excellent teacher, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. Vincent's horse business continued to thrive, and he started building an addition onto his house, a larger bedroom and a proper parlor, spaces designed for a family. They were married on a beautiful day in late April, when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers were pushing up through the earth. The ceremony was held in the small church in Humboldt, with Doc Miller giving Clara away and Tommy serving as Vincent's best man. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire service, and half the town showed up to wish them well. Clara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Vincent had ordered special from San Francisco, and she carried wildflowers that Vincent had picked himself that morning. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed his bride, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and enough food to feed an army. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing as the sun set and the stars came out. Vincent whirled Clara around the makeshift dance floor, and she laughed with pure joy, her face glowing in the lamplight. "Happy?" Vincent asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clara replied. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Vincent Xavier." "You saved mine too," Vincent said. "I just didn't know I needed saving until I found you." They left the party early, to the good-natured catcalls of their guests, and rode back to the ranch together under a canopy of stars. Vincent carried Clara over the threshold, and she gasped when she saw what he'd done. The house was filled with candles, their soft light making everything glow, and someone, probably Tommy, had strewn flower petals across the floor. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. "Not as beautiful as you," Vincent replied. Their wedding night was everything Clara had hoped for and more. Vincent was gentle and patient, aware that her experience with intimacy had not been pleasant in her first marriage. He took his time, worshipping her body with his hands and mouth, showing her that physical love could be a source of pleasure rather than just duty. Clara discovered a passion in herself that she hadn't known existed, a wild joy in the touch and taste and feel of this man who loved her. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. They were meant for each other, and they both knew it. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the big bed, Clara traced patterns on Vincent's chest and said, "I want to tell you something about Samuel." Vincent tensed slightly, but he said, "All right." He wasn't a bad man, but he was weak, and when things got hard, he took it out on me. Not physically, but with words. He made me feel small and stupid and worthless. For the last 2 years of our marriage, I believed him. I thought I was all those things. "You're none of those things," Vincent said fiercely. "You're brilliant and strong and brave. I know that now. You've shown me that. And I need you to understand that what we have, what we are together, it's nothing like what I had before. This is real, this is love, and I'm so grateful for it." Vincent kissed her forehead. "No more looking back, we only look forward from here." "Forward," Clara agreed. Together, their first year of marriage was blissful. Clara continued teaching, and Vincent's ranch prospered. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Clara helped with the horses when she could, and Vincent would sit in on her classes sometimes, amazed at her patience and skill with the children. In December, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Vincent on Christmas morning, presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties that Mrs. Chen had helped her make. Vincent stared at the booties, then at Clara, then back at the booties. "A baby, we're having a baby." "Yes," Clara said, suddenly nervous. They'd never discussed children explicitly. "Are you happy?" Vincent whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "Happy? I'm ecstatic. A baby, our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Clara had to give up teaching as her belly grew too large to comfortably stand for long periods. She promised her students she would return after the baby was born, and the school board agreed to hold her position. Their son was born on a hot August evening in 1877, after a long but uncomplicated labor attended by Doc Miller and Mrs. Chen. Vincent was there the whole time, holding Clara's hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth, and when the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, Vincent cried unashamedly. "He's perfect," Vincent said, cradling the tiny bundle. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Victor Samuel Xavier, honoring both Vincent and Clara's past. Little Victor had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. Parenthood suited them both. Vincent was a doting father, patient and playful, and Clara bloomed in her role as mother. The house that had once been so quiet was now filled with the sounds of a baby. Cries and coos and gurgles, the soft lullabies Clara sang, the silly songs Vincent made up to make Victor smile. When Victor was 6 months old, Clara returned to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Chen watching the baby during school hours. It was a good arrangement, giving Clara the intellectual stimulation she craved while also allowing her to be fully present as a mother. The years passed in a blur of happiness and growth. Victor grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious boy who loved horses almost as much as his father did. When he was 3, Clara became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter, a tiny girl with Vincent's green eyes and Clara's delicate features. They named her Catherine Grace Xavier, and she was as different from her brother as night from day, quiet and contemplative, where Victor was energetic and outgoing. By 1882, the Xavier family was well established in Humboldt. Vincent's ranch had grown substantially, and he was now one of the most respected horsemen in the territory. Clara had been appointed headmistress of the school, overseeing 3 other teachers and a student body of nearly 60 children. They'd built onto the house twice more, adding bedrooms for the children and a study where Clara could work on lesson plans, and Vincent could manage the ranch's accounts. On a cool evening in October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air held the first hint of winter, Vincent and Clara sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Victor, now 5 years old, was teaching 3-year-old Catherine how to braid a rope, his little face serious with concentration. "Can you believe it's been 6 years?" Clara asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "Since I found you in that wagon," Vincent shook his head. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "I was dying in that wagon," Clara said quietly. "Not just physically, but inside. I'd given up. And then you came along and wrapped me in your coat and gave me warmth and hope and eventually your whole heart." "Best thing I ever did," Vincent replied. "Finding you, bringing you home. You and the kids, you're my whole world." "We're lucky," Clara said. "Not everyone gets a second chance like we did." "No, they don't," Vincent pulled her closer. "But we didn't just get lucky, Clara. We chose this. We chose each other, chose to be brave, chose to love even when it seemed too soon or too complicated. We made our luck." Clara thought about that, about the frightened woman she'd been in that frozen wagon and the strong, confident woman she was now. Vincent was right. They'd made their luck, built their happiness one day at a time through hard work and commitment and love. "Mama, Papa," Victor called. "Look, Catherine did it. She braided the rope all by herself." Clara and Vincent applauded, and Catherine beamed with pride. The family spent the rest of the evening together, eating dinner, playing games, and reading stories before bed. After the children were tucked in and sleeping, Vincent and Clara returned to the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "You ever miss St. Louis?" Vincent asked. "The life you could have had." "Not even for a second," Clara replied without hesitation. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children, in this place we've built together. This is home." Vincent kissed her, soft and sweet, and Clara melted into it as she always did. Their love had only deepened over the years, grown richer and more complex, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would love this man until her dying day. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The railroad finally came to Humboldt in 1883, transforming the sleepy supply town into a bustling hub. Vincent's business exploded, and he had to hire 3 more ranch hands to keep up with demand. Clara's school expanded as well, eventually requiring a whole new building that the town funded through a special levy. Victor grew into a lanky boy who was more comfortable on horseback than on his own 2 feet, and Catherine surprised everyone by developing a talent for numbers and business. By the time she was 10, she was helping her father with the ranch accounts and doing a better job than he ever had. In 1887, when Victor was 10 and Catherine was 8, Clara gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Benjamin Paul and Jacob Thomas. The addition of 2 more children to the household could have been chaotic, but somehow it just made everything more joyful. Victor and Catherine adored their baby brothers, and the whole family pitched in to help care for them. The ranch prospered beyond Vincent's wildest dreams. By 1890, he owned over 1,000 acres and ran a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the West. Clara had retired from teaching to focus on their growing family, but she still tutored students privately and served on the school board. They'd become pillars of the community, respected and admired, but they never forgot where they'd come from or how they'd found each other. Every year on the anniversary of the day Vincent had found Clara in that wagon, they would take a ride up to the mountain pass, to the place where their story had begun. It became a tradition, that annual ride. Sometimes they brought the children, telling them the story of how Papa had saved Mama's life and how love could bloom even in the harshest winter. Other times they went alone, wanting to remember and honor the miracle of their meeting. On their 15th anniversary, Vincent surprised Clara by taking her to that same grove of pine trees where he'd kept her alive through the storm. He'd arranged everything in advance, and when they arrived, there was a picnic laid out, a bottle of wine, and a small wooden marker he'd carved himself. The marker read, "Here began our forever, January 1876. Clara cried when she saw it, happy tears that Vincent kissed away. They sat in the grove, eating and drinking and remembering, and then Vincent pulled out a small box. "I never properly proposed to you," he said. "I mean, I did, but it was rushed and emotional, and I didn't have a ring. I've been waiting for the right moment to do it properly." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with 3 small diamonds, nothing ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. "Clara Vincent Xavier, will you marry me? Again. Renew our vows and promise to love me for another 15 years, and 15 after that, and 15 after that, until we're old and gray and our great-grandchildren are running around our feet." Clara laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes, "You ridiculous man." "Yes, of course, yes." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the simple band she'd worn since their wedding day, and they kissed in the grove where he'd first saved her life, where their love story had truly begun. They renewed their vows that spring, on the same day they'd married 15 years earlier. All four of their children stood with them, and half the state of Nevada seemed to turn out for the celebration. The local newspaper even ran a story about them, calling them Nevada's most romantic couple and recounting the tale of their unusual meeting. Vincent was embarrassed by the attention, but Clara reveled in it. She loved that their story gave people hope, showed them that love could be found in the most unexpected places and times. As the century turned and 1900 arrived, Vincent and Clara found themselves firmly in middle age. Vincent was 44, his dark hair now streaked with silver, and Clara was 43, still beautiful but with laugh lines around her eyes and a few strands of gray in her dark hair. Their children were nearly grown, Victor at 22 already managing much of the ranch business, Catherine at 20 proving to be a shrewd businesswoman in her own right, and the twins at 13 giving their parents premature gray hairs with their wild antics. But middle age suited them. They'd grown comfortable with each other in the best possible way, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with just a glance. They still loved passionately, still laughed together, still found joy in the simple act of being together. On a warm evening in June 1902, the entire Xavier family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Victor had just gotten engaged to a lovely young woman from Reno, and Catherine had announced her intention to attend university in San Francisco to study business. The twins were about to graduate from school, and Vincent and Clara were celebrating their 26th wedding anniversary. The table was laden with food, and the yard was filled with friends and family. Doc Miller was there, now in his 80s but still sharp as a tack. Mrs. Chen had closed the store for the day to attend. Tommy, no longer a young ranch hand but Vincent's partner in the business, was there with his wife and 5 children. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, Vincent stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. 26 years ago, I married the love of my life. But our story started 6 years before that, on the coldest day I can remember, when I found this woman half frozen in a wagon and decided I couldn't just ride past. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Vincent still had the power to move her after all these years. "I wrapped her in my coat that day because she needed warmth," Vincent continued. "But what I didn't know was that she would wrap me in her love and give me a warmth that would last the rest of my life. She gave me children, she gave me a home, she gave me purpose and joy and laughter. She took a lonely man and made him whole." He turned to Clara, his green eyes shining with love. "So here's to you, my darling wife. Thank you for not giving up in that wagon. Thank you for accepting my help. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for the life we've built together. You are my heart, my soul, my everything." To Clara. The crowd chorused and everyone drank. Clara stood and went to Vincent, wrapping her arms around him and burying her face in his shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me." "Always," Vincent whispered back. "Forever." The party continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, and the Xavier family was left alone under the stars. Victor and Catherine helped their younger brothers clean up, and then all 4 children hugged their parents goodnight and headed to their respective bedrooms. Vincent and Clara walked hand in hand to their favorite spot on the porch, settling into the swing that Vincent had built years ago. They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Tell me the story again," Clara said softly. Vincent smiled. She asked this every year on their anniversary, wanted to hear him recount the day they met. He never tired of telling it. "It was the coldest day I'd ever seen," Vincent began, his voice taking on the cadence of a story often told. "The snow was so deep that Ranger didn't want to walk through it. But he caught a scent on the wind, something that made him stop and refuse to go on. So I followed his instincts and I found a wagon, broken and tilted in a ravine. I climbed inside and there you were." "What did I look like?" Clara prompted, though she knew the answer. "Like an angel who'd fallen from heaven. Beautiful and pale and so cold I thought you were already gone. But then you breathed, just the smallest breath, and I knew I had to save you. So I wrapped you in my coat, the warmest thing I had, and I carried you to safety. And then I built a fire and kept you alive through the longest night of my life. I watched you breathe, counted every breath, and I prayed to God that you'd wake up. And when morning came and you opened your eyes, I knew my life had just changed forever." "You offered me your heart," Clara said. "I did. That day in the grove I offered you my warmth and my protection. But over the next weeks and months I offered you my heart and you took it and kept it safe. You've had it ever since." Clara turned and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of love. "And you have mine, always." They sat on the porch until the moon was high overhead, talking and dreaming about the future. Victor's wedding in the fall, Catherine's adventure to San Francisco, the twins' plans to join the ranch business. Grandchildren someday. Growing old together, surrounded by the family they'd built and the love they'd nurtured. "You have any regrets?" Clara asked as they finally headed to bed. Vincent thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you and to this life. I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I," Clara agreed. "Even the hard parts, even the loss and the fear. It all led to this moment, to us, to everything we have, and it was worth it." The years continued their steady march. Victor married his sweetheart and presented Vincent and Clara with their first grandchild, a boy named David, in 1904. Catherine returned from San Francisco with a degree in business and a husband, a fellow student she'd fallen in love with. The twins both married local girls and started families of their own. By 1910, Vincent and Clara were surrounded by grandchildren, 8 in total, ranging from newborn to 6 years old. The ranch had evolved to keep pace with the changing times, now breeding horses specifically for ranch work and the growing automobile industry. Catherine had taken over the business side entirely, freeing Vincent to focus on the breeding program he loved. Clara had returned to teaching in a limited capacity, tutoring students who needed extra help and teaching adult literacy classes in the evenings. She'd also started writing down their story, the tale of how they'd met and fallen in love, hoping to preserve it for future generations. On a crisp October day in 1912, Vincent woke Clara before dawn. "Get dressed," he said mysteriously. "I have a surprise for you." Clara dressed warmly, curious, and followed Vincent outside. 2 horses were saddled and waiting, and Clara realized where they were going. "The grove?" she asked. "The grove," Vincent confirmed. They rode through the awakening landscape, the sky slowly lightening from black to gray to pink. It had been a few years since they'd made this pilgrimage, their busy lives and growing family making it harder to get away. But as they approached the mountain pass, Clara felt the same sense of peace and rightness she always did in this place. The grove was unchanged, eternal. Vincent had maintained the little wooden marker over the years, recarving the letters when they faded. He helped Clara down from her horse, and they stood together in the place where he'd saved her life 36 years ago. "I'm 62 years old," Vincent said. "And you're 61. "We're not young anymore, Clara." "No, we're not," Clara agreed, wondering where this was going. "I want to build something here," Vincent continued. "A small cabin, nothing fancy. A place where we can come and remember, where our children and grandchildren can come and hear our story. A place that honors what started here." Clara felt tears well up. "Vincent, that's beautiful. Will you help me design it? Make it exactly what you want." "Of course I will." They spent the morning planning, sketching ideas in the dirt, imagining the little cabin that would stand as a monument to their love. When they finally rode back to the ranch, both were filled with excitement for this new project. The cabin was completed by spring of 1913. A cozy structure with a fireplace, a sleeping loft, and windows that looked out over the mountain pass. Vincent and Clara furnished it simply, with a bed, a table and chairs and shelves for the books they loved. They spent their first night there on their 37th wedding anniversary, and it felt like coming full circle. "In this place, you gave me life," Clara said as they lay in the big bed, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "And now we get to spend the rest of our lives returning here, remembering. And making new memories," Vincent added, "with our family, with each other." They made good on that promise. The cabin became a Xavier family tradition. Every summer, the entire family would make the trip to the mountains for a week-long gathering. The grandchildren would play in the grove, and Vincent and Clara would tell them the story of the frozen wagon and the cowboy who couldn't ride past. The children loved the story, made it part of their family mythology. They would act it out, taking turns being Grandpa Vincent or Grandma Clara, pretending to be frozen, pretending to build fires. It made Clara's heart full to see how their love story had become part of their legacy. In 1920, Vincent celebrated his 70th birthday surrounded by 4 children, 23 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. He was still strong and healthy, his mind sharp, though his hair was pure white now and he moved a bit slower than he used to. Clara, at 69, was still teaching, still writing, still the vibrant, intelligent woman Vincent had fallen in love with all those years ago. They'd grown old together, exactly as they'd promised on that mountainside so long ago. "What's the secret?" Victor's eldest son asked at the birthday celebration. The young man was engaged to be married and wanted advice from his grandparents, who everyone agreed had the strongest marriage in the family. Vincent and Clara exchanged a glance, that silent communication that came from decades of partnership. "Choose each other," Clara said. "Every single day choose each other. Even when it's hard, even when you're angry or tired or frustrated, choose love. And be willing to offer your heart," Vincent added, "not just once at the beginning, but over and over again throughout your life. Keep offering it, keep being vulnerable, keep showing up. Also," Clara added with a mischievous smile, "marry someone who makes you laugh. Life is too short to spend it with someone who doesn't appreciate your sense of humor." The family laughed, and the young man thanked them and promised to remember their advice. That night, as Vincent and Clara prepared for bed, Vincent said, "We did good, didn't we? With the kids, with the family, with our life." "We did great," Clara corrected. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you, Clara Xavier. I've loved you for 44 years, and I'll love you for however many more we have." "I love you too, Vincent. Thank you for wrapping me in your coat all those years ago. Thank you for offering me your heart." "Best decision I ever made," Vincent said, pulling her close. They lived on into the 1920s, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. The Xavier Ranch was now run by Victor and the twins, with Catherine managing the financial side from her home in Reno. But Vincent and Clara remained at the heart of it all, the foundation on which everything else was built. In the spring of 1926, exactly 50 years after they'd met, Vincent and Clara made one last trip to the cabin on the mountain. They were both in their mid-70s now, and the journey was harder than it used to be, but they were determined to commemorate this milestone in the place where it all began. They spent a week at the cabin, just the two of them, reminiscing and laughing and loving each other as they always had. On the actual anniversary day, they sat outside and watched the sun rise over the mountains. 50 years, Clara marveled. Half a century since you found me in that wagon. Best 50 years of my life, Vincent said. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days. The times we fought or struggled, especially those days. They taught us how to weather storms together. They made us stronger. Clara leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I was dying in that wagon. I'd given up. And you brought me back to life, gave me a reason to keep fighting. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Vincent insisted. I was alone, going through life without knowing what I was missing. And then you opened my eyes to what love could be, what partnership and family and real happiness looked like. We saved each other, Clara. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching the world wake up around them. Then Clara said, "Promise me something. Anything. When our time comes, whenever that is, promise me we'll be together. I don't want to face whatever comes next without you." Vincent brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I promise. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, just like we've faced everything else." They returned to the ranch renewed and at peace. They continued to live full lives, surrounded by the family they adored and the community they'd helped build. Vincent celebrated his 80th birthday in 1930 and Clara hers the following year. In the fall of 1932, Vincent fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Doc Miller's successor's best efforts, his condition worsened. Clara never left his side, sitting with him day and night, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together. On a quiet evening in November, with their children and grandchildren gathered around his bed, Vincent opened his eyes and found Clara's face. "Tell me the story," he whispered. Clara knew exactly what he meant. Through her tears, she told it one last time. "It was the coldest day anyone could remember," she began, her voice shaking. "And a cowboy was riding through the mountains when his horse caught a scent on the wind. The cowboy found a wagon, and inside was a woman who was freezing to death. So he wrapped her in his coat and carried her to safety. He built a fire and kept her warm through the longest night, and when morning came and the woman opened her eyes, the cowboy fell in love. And she fell in love with him too," Vincent said softly, "and they lived happily ever after." "Yes," Clara sobbed. "They lived happily ever after." Vincent smiled, squeezed her hand one last time and closed his eyes. He slipped away peacefully, surrounded by love, exactly as he would have wanted. Clara's grief was profound, but she found solace in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they'd built together. She lived on for another 6 years, keeping Vincent's memory alive through her stories and her love. She spent her final years finishing the book she'd been writing, the full account of their love story. It was published privately and distributed to every member of the Xavier family, a treasure that would be passed down through generations. On a spring morning in 1938, Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Her children found her in the big bed she'd shared with Vincent, a smile on her face, as if she'd seen something wonderful. They buried her next to Vincent in the family plot on the ranch, under a pair of cottonwood trees that Vincent had planted when they'd first married. The headstones were simple but elegant, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription that Victor had chosen. Here lies Vincent Xavier and Clara Jameson Xavier. He found her freezing in a wagon, wrapped her in his coat, and offered his heart. She accepted, and they lived the greatest love story ever told. The Xavier family continued to thrive through the decades that followed. The ranch passed from generation to generation, always staying in the family, always honoring the foundation that Vincent and Clara had laid. The cabin on the mountain became a cherished family retreat, maintained lovingly and visited regularly. Vincent and Clara's story became legend in Humboldt and beyond. Couples would visit their grave, hoping to absorb some of the love and magic that had made their relationship so special. The school where Clara had taught was renamed Xavier Elementary in her honor, and a scholarship fund was established for students pursuing education degrees. In 2026, on the 150th anniversary of the day Vincent found Clara in that frozen wagon, the Xavier family held a massive reunion at the ranch. Over 300 descendants gathered to celebrate the love story that had started it all, to honor the courage and commitment of two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. The youngest generation, children who'd never known their ancestors but who'd grown up hearing the stories, played in the same yard where Victor and Catherine had once braided ropes. Teenagers explored the original ranch house, now preserved as a museum. Adults gathered to share memories and photos and stories passed down through the generations. And up on the mountain, in the grove where it had all begun, a small group made a pilgrimage to the cabin. They stood around the restored wooden marker, reading the words carved so long ago. Here began our forever. Because that's what Vincent and Clara had built. A forever love that transcended death and time, that rippled outward through their children and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, touching lives and inspiring hearts decades and even centuries after that frozen January day. Their story proved that love could be found in the darkest moments, that kindness and compassion could change a life, that two people who chose each other and committed to building something beautiful together could create a legacy that would never die. Vincent had wrapped Clara in his coat to keep her body alive. But in doing so, he'd wrapped her in his love, giving her something far more precious than mere survival. He'd given her a reason to live, a partner to walk beside, and a future filled with joy and meaning. And Clara, in accepting his gift, had given him the same. She'd taken a lonely cowboy and shown him what it meant to truly live, to love without reservation, to build a family and a home and a life worth living. Together, they'd created something extraordinary. Not because they were special or unique, but because they were brave enough to open their hearts, to take a chance, to choose love when it would have been easier to walk away. That was their true legacy. Not the ranch or the money or the descendants, but the proof that love conquers all, that happily ever after is possible, and that sometimes the coldest winter night can lead to the warmest forever. As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, the Xavier family gathered in a circle, holding hands, and one of the great-grandchildren, a young woman who'd inherited Clara's gray eyes and Vincent's dark hair, read aloud from the book Clara had written so many years ago. The words rang out clear and true in the evening air, telling the story one more time, keeping it alive for another generation. He found me freezing in a wagon, wrapped me in his coat, and offered his heart. I accepted, and my life truly began. Love doesn't always arrive in the way we expect, but when it comes, when real love comes, you recognize it. You feel it in your bones. And if you're brave enough to reach for it, to hold on to it, to nurture it and fight for it, it will sustain you through everything life throws your way. Vincent was my everything. He saved my life and gave it meaning. And I hope, Wherever he is now, he knows that I was his everything too. We were two halves of one whole, two hearts beating as one, and death itself cannot change that. Our love is eternal, written in the stars, carved into the mountains, living on in every child and grandchild who carries our blood. This is my gift to you, our descendants, the story of how love saved us both. May you all be so lucky. May you all find your own Vincent or Clara. May you all know what it means to be loved completely and to love without reservation. That is the greatest treasure life has to offer. Everything else is just details. The family stood in silence after the reading, tears streaming down many faces, hearts full of gratitude for the legacy they'd inherited. Then someone started singing, an old song that Vincent and Clara had loved, and soon everyone joined in, their voices rising together in the twilight. And if you'd listened very carefully, if you'd been paying attention, you might have heard two more voices joining the chorus. Voices that sounded like a cowboy and his beloved wife, still together after all these years, still in love, still creating their forever in whatever realm they now inhabited. Because true love never dies. It transforms, it evolves, but it never ends. Vincent and Clara had proven that. They'd shown that one act of kindness on a frozen mountainside could bloom into a love story for the ages, that offering your heart to someone in need could result in a lifetime of happiness. Their story had started with a cowboy who couldn't ride past someone in trouble. It had continued through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, all the ups and downs that make up a human life. And it ended, if it could be said to end at all, with a family united in love, with a legacy secure, with proof that happily ever after isn't just a fairy tale but a possibility available to anyone brave enough to reach for it. Vincent Xavier had found Clara Jameson freezing in a wagon on the coldest day of winter. He'd wrapped her in his coat, carried her to safety, and built a fire to keep her alive. But more than that, so much more than that, he'd offered her his heart. And she'd taken it, treasured it, and given hers in return. That was the true miracle. Not the rescue itself, though that was remarkable. Not even the survival, though that was fortunate. The true miracle was what came after. Two people choosing each other, committing to each other, building a life together that would inspire generations. That's what love does. It saves us. It transforms us. It gives us reason to keep going when everything else says to give up. It connects us to something larger than ourselves, something eternal and beautiful and worth fighting for. Vincent and Clara knew that. They lived it every day of their marriage, and they passed that knowledge on to everyone they touched. Their story became a beacon, a reminder that love is always worth it, that kindness matters, that one person can change another person's entire world. As the Xavier family reunion wound down and people began heading home, taking with them renewed appreciation for the ancestors who'd made their lives possible, the ranch settled back into peaceful quiet. The building stood strong, maintained lovingly by each generation. The land stretched out fertile and green, producing life just as it had for over a century. And up on the mountain, in the little cabin built to honor a great love, a light seemed to glow in the window. Just a trick of the setting sun, surely. Or maybe, just maybe, the spirits of a cowboy and his beloved wife returned to the place where their forever had begun, still together, still in love, still proving that happily ever after is real. The end.